Hello, folks, and welcome to the first spooky story, or at least the start of one, since I took a break for the summer. And as promised, we are starting with Carmilla because somebody was kind enough to buy me this really beautiful copy of it, I think last Christmas. So today we will. Oh, it's Belle. Can you. You're shaking the camera. Just, no. Please make a choice. Claws! Just, yeah, sit there. Okay. Yes, so I've got this lovely edition that I would like to share with you. So today we'll read probably just the prologue and the first chapter. Just want to go a little bit slower, sort of test the waters. And of course, the other reason to move slowly is in my lap right now, and I don't know how long it will take her to settle. If she'll settle, she is currently trying to murder a drawstring on my pants. So we'll see how Belle does. Hopefully, she doesn't cause too many problems, but we'll see. We'll get on with the story, and we'll see. She's left. She'll probably be back, but for now she's left. So, Carmilla, Sheridan, pardon me, Sheridan the Fanu. Yeah, Sheridan the Fanu, whatever. I'm tired, and I've already been fighting with this cat, so. We have read at least one of his stories on this channel before. I don't offhand remember which, but we definitely have. So we're going to read Carmilla, which is, one of the first sort of vampire in the modern sense stories. Now, before I get into it, the usual warning, period source, racism, homophobia, whatever you can probably think of. In fact, off the top of my head, I do recall there being some race things in here that are obviously not acceptable, but nonetheless they aren't in here. So, and that's just what I can think of off the top of my head. So the usual warnings that there might be some content in here that's like a little bit suspect for modern people, and rightly so. But it might be in there. Use your judgment if it seems like it's not going to be quite your thing. I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations I might make. And other than that, be prepared to be interrupted at any point by a cat who has an enormous sense of entitlement and no concept of personal space. So that might happen. I will try and mitigate Belle's interference as much as possible, but no guarantees. It's not a great sign if I'm coughing already, is it? Anyway, here we go. The prologue of Carmilla. Upon a paper attached to the narrative which follows, Dr. Hesselius has written a rather elaborate note, which he accompanies with a reference to his essay on the strange subject which the manuscript we are not off to a good start. On the strange subject which the manuscript illuminates. This mysterious subject he treats, in that essay, with his usual learning and acumen, and with remarkable directness and condensation. It will form but one volume of the series of that extraordinary man's collected papers. As I publish the case, in this volume, simply to interest the laity, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it in nothing, and after due consideration, I have determined, therefore, to abstain from presenting any précis of the learned doctor's reasoning, or extract from his statement on a subject which he describes as involving, not improbably, some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence and its intermediates. I was anxious on discovering this paper to reopen the correspondence commenced by Dr. Hesselius so many years before with a person so clever and careful as his informant seems to have been. Much to my regret, however, I found that she had died in the interval, as often seems to be the case in 19th century literature and life. She probably could have added little to the narrative which she communicates in the following pages, which, so far as I can pronounce, such conscientious particularity. So that was just the prologue, and here we go with chapter 1 of Carmilla. In Styria, we, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a castle or schloss. I don't know if that word is pronounced that way, but that's how I want it to be pronounced. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. 800 or 900 a year does wonders. Scantily enough, ours would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place that seems kind of insulting to the people that live there, but cool, where everything is so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would add at all materially, oh my God, this is just going to be a day. I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all add materially to our comforts, or even luxuries. Oh, before I get too far into this, I knew there was a reason I mentioned homophobia specifically. So Carmilla, in some interpretations of the text, if you read between the lines, there is a lesbian relationship between characters. So if such a thing interests you, feel free to look out for that as we go along. In fact, this book is often mentioned by people who study such things as being kind of like an early example of this sort of queer-coded literature, meaning, of course, that it's not outright in your face, but like if you look, it is there. So, that's kind of an interesting thing to look out for if something like that interests you. My father was in the Austrian service. I almost said the Australian service. That would put quite a different spin on the book, I think, if the character was Australian. And retired upon a pension. Yeah, that's how you know it's old. Who gets a pension anymore? And his patrimony, and purchased this feudal residence, and the small estate on which it stands, a bargain. I have heard her knock something over. I don't think I'll go check. It's probably fine. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat, stocked with perch, and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface, white fleets of water lilies. I mean, it sounds lovely if you aren't familiar with the general assholery of most swans. Overall, the Schloss, God, I want it to be pronounced that way. I'm probably wrong, but that pronunciation amuses me. Shows its many windowed fronts, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I speak the truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles. I like that we've specified English miles. The nearest inhabited schloss of any historic associations is that of old General Ono. Oh God, what have you got? Oh, no! I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Belle emerged from the bedroom with something she absolutely was not supposed to have. Speak the truth. The nearest inhabited Schloss of any historic associations is that of Old General Spelsdorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. I have said the nearest inhabited village. Yeah, I did think it kind of weird that you specify, because there is only 3 miles to the westward, that is to say, in the direction of General Spieldorf's. Oh, that's a tongue twister. General Spelsdorf's Schloss, a ruined village, with its quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are the mouldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein or Karnstein. I think I will go with Karnstein, now extinct, who once owned the equally desolate chateau, which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. Foreshadowing, anybody? Sorry, just monitoring the cat, just making sure she's... I must tell you now how very little is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the buildings attached to the Schloss. I mean, yeah, they're obviously not people. Why do you have to talk about the lower orders? Listen and wonder. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19, 8 years have passed since then. Pardon me. I and my father... Oh, no. That was my phone. Oh, no, you're back. I was worried it was Belle dragging something away, but it's fine. I and my father constituted the family at the Schloss. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who had been with me from, I might almost say, my infancy. Yeah, okay, your mother doesn't need a name. That's cool. I could not remember the time when her fat... there's a descriptor. With her, I could not remember the time when her fat, benignant, I think meaning benign, but benignant really does not sound like an attractive word. Face was not a familiar picture in my memory. This was Madame Perrodon, a native of Berne, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me the loss of my mother, whom I do not even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our little dinner party. There was a fourth, Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, a lady, such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added English, which, partly to prevent its becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a babble at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. And there were 2 or 3 young lady friends besides, pretty nearly of my own age, who were occasional visitors for longer or shorter terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you, except for all the young ladies who visit and all the people that live around you. Oh, God. Please don't do that again. My gouvernante had just so much control over me as you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl whose... Belle, please stop doing that. whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which, in fact, never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by, why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, I think it's still a nursery regardless, but sure, was a large room in the upper story of the castle with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old when one night I awoke and, looking round the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales, and of all such lore as makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flickering of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall nearer to our faces. I'll be honest, I think that sounds awful. It's like the parents that, won't let their kids do anything. Oh my God, what are you doing? I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper, preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when to my surprise I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the other side of the bed. It was that of a young lady, who was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The lady started back with her eyes fixed on me and then slipped down upon the floor and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story, they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with an unwonted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room and peep under tables and pluck open cupboards, and the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all 3 examining my chest, where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the 2 servants who were in charge of the nursery remained sitting up all night, and from that time a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. Man, rich people just live differently. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. How well I remember his long, saturnine face, slightly pitted with small smallpox, and his chestnut wig. For a good while, every second day, he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. Same. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror, and could not bear to be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully and asking the nurse a number of questions and laughing very heartily at one of the answers and patting me on the shoulder and kissing me and telling me not to be frightened, that it was nothing but a dream and could not hurt me, wholly run-on sentence Batman. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and I was awfully frightened. Hello, Belle. What are you doing? Just sit. please. I was a little consoled by the nursery maid's assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me and lain down beside me in the bed, and that I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face. But this, though supported by the nurse, did not satisfy me. I remembered in the course of that day a venerable old man in a black cassock coming into the room with the nurse and housekeeper, and talking a little to them and very kindly to me. His face was very sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray, and joining my hands together, desired me to say softly while they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers for us, for Jesus' sake." I think these were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself, and my nurse used for years to make me say them in my prayers. I remembered so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black cassock as he stood in that rude, lofty brown room with the clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering its shadowy atmosphere through the small lattice. He kneeled, and the 3 women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for, what appeared to me, a long time. I forget all my life preceding that event, and for some time after it is all obscure also, but the scenes I have just described stand out vivid as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. And that is the end of the first chapter of Carmilla. We will leave it there for the time being, pick it up later. I apologize for the interruptions from the cat. Hopefully, as I do this more often with her around, she'll just get used to the setup and she won't be as interested in things. So I'm going to go see what she was messing with out in the kitchen and hope it wasn't anything dire, but otherwise, thank you for spending some time with me today, and I hope to see you back here again for the next chapter of Carmilla. Goodbye, folks.